Kia ora koutou katoa. I start with a dictionary definition of fable, a fictitious narrative such as a legendary story of supernatural happenings designed to teach a specific moral lesson. This season of Easter, which in the church calendar concludes after 40 days on the Feast of Ascension, last Thursday, invites us to read again the stories of Jesus' post-death, apparition-like encounters with his disciples. These are called in scholar speak the appearance narratives. And today I want to invite you to consider three such narratives where the apparition, or in scholar speak the risen Christ, or simply the Christ, is at first unrecognizable. All three stories are only recounted once: the Emmaus Road in Luke, the garden and the Lakeside in John. Secondly, I'd like you to think of these three narratives as fables and use our imagination and experience to ask what might be the specific moral lesson, rather than the theological lesson, each might teach. A moral lesson essentially being about how we might live, rather than a theological lesson being essentially about God. But firstly, my motivation in doing so. With the fixation on a literal physical resurrection of Christ in many churches, it's tempting to wish all the Gospels had ended like Mark's. That is, an ending where no dead body has come back literally to life. Yet I'm not tempted, for it plays into the hands of those who want to make faith into a fact, an equation, an absolute certainty. Apologists for the dead body come alive thesis use it for this end. The claim that Jesus is alive literally is used as the ultimate proof of the Christian God, the sign of all signs, the miracle of all miracles. So they say. An apologist for the, to quote Lloyd Gearing, his bones are buried in Palestine thesis, although I think this is more likely, also slide into the mire of faith needing to be provable. Provable, that is, by using accepted historical or philosophical method. Provable to counter the supernatural claims of the literalists and make religion real to life. Though I admire the rigor of some such historical and philosophical thinking, I want to hold to an understanding of faith that allows plenty of room for the imagination, for what Nikihare calls enchantment, namely to the capacity to see coincidence and beauty combine. And I also want to ask the question, so what? Does a literal, resuscitated, resurrected Jesus, who allegedly wandered Palestine for 40 days after he died, make any difference to how we might live? The older I get, the less I'm concerned about belief, and the more I'm concerned about behavior, personal, social, political, which of course is influenced by belief. So what do the Jesus apparition accounts say about our behavior? The resurrection appearance narratives of Luke, Matthew, and John, in all their inconsistencies, magical thinking, and individual and group experiences of empowerment, leave room for the imagination, for doubt, for wonder, for questions and commitment. So long as we don't post them up as facts, then paint them into doctrines and plaster them into creeds and preach creedal Christianity as the meaning of faith. So I submit that all these appearance narratives are fables. They are using the power of storytelling to make a point, which is pointedly how to live in the shadow of Jesus' death, in the glare of Roman violence and oppression, in such a way that a common life, a common good, is nurtured, valued, protected, and grown. The 3 episodes I'm referring to are the Emmaus Road, where the Christ, I use that title rather as a placeholder than anything else. Christ is a traveller, tramping the trail to a small town outside Jerusalem. Another, the garden, where Christ is a cemetery gardener. And last, the Lakeside, where the Christ is a fisherman's friend, pointing to where the fish are, and then whipping them up in a cooked breakfast, along with bread for the workers. I suggest that the Christ's unrecognizability is a deliberate narrative device to not only create tension in the story, will they recognize him or not, but to allow us to bring our imagination to the interpretive task. What is God trying to say to the church by portraying Jesus in these guises? Let's start with the Emmaus story. And much of what God is trying to say, to use that old church language, is the importance of story and storytelling. Into the quiet landscape and the lengthening day comes this extended exchange between the 3 hikers, as stories from the past, their tradition and myths are knitted into the suffering of the present in order to create together a new garment, a new possibility of hope. All said, listened to, and questioned while walking. A ministry of the word, as the old language would call it. And then coming upon an inn, there is an invitation, a break in the talking and walking to stop for sustenance. Hands and feet are washed, food is shared. There's a taking, a blessing, a breaking, a giving of food that the 2 travellers experience and understand as the Christ moment. A revelation, presence, if you like, an opening of the eyes that is there, then is gone. A ministry of sacrament occurs. And then magically, as fables do, the key actor is removed from the scene. So what's the moral of this story? I suggest firstly we consider that there is a message in the deliberate anonymity of the travellers. We don't know who this Cleopas was who walked with Jesus, nor the name or gender of Cleopas's companion. Whereas every other appearance narrative is clear in naming important leaders in the early Jesus movements. Cleopas and friend were unimportant. Nobodies, as Crossan would say. Also, the town of Emmaus is an unusual choice. It existed, but it could refer to any one of 3 villages. More to the point, it is not renowned for anything. So it's not where Elijah was born, or Abraham stubbed his toe, or where one of David's 8 or more wives originated from. Like the hikers, the town is unimportant. Secondly, the corridor on the road. Despite its way it's written up as a kind of lecture, there is a sense, or is it our imagination at play, that this is a dialogue. The now of Cleopas and friend, indeed all the bereft followers of Jesus, were linked with the then of the past in order to reinterpret the now. And again, imaginatively, I think Cleopas and friend questioned the new now. But a slow burn began for them, the slow burn of hope. Lastly, the actions of inviting a stranger to dine, the ordering of food and normal washing before eating, the sharing of such food, manakitanga, later abbreviated and stylized with the words taking, blessing, breaking, giving. This was the primary way that the early Jesus groups came together. Actions, behaviors, which pointed to the core of what they believed. So I would suggest that the moral of the story is simple. It's that we ourselves are in this story. We are the unimportant and unknown ones. We walk and talk the story, knitting the old with our experience to create the new. We are those who extend and have extended to us hospitality. Who we are and what we do is a blessing and is to be offered and broken for sharing. We are the bread and wine. And in all these simple actions, walking, talking, blessing, breaking, sharing, faith comes alive. This is how we are to live. We are the resurrection and life. The second story of an unrecognizable Christ is the garden, or rather the cemetery garden with the cemetery gardener. And to this place, amongst this foliage, Mary Magdalene is alone and weeping. In this fable, she's found the tomb of Jesus with the stone door rolled away. She's gone to get Jesus' friend to get Peter and the nameless but exalted disciple whom Jesus loved. Come and found the body gone, and talked to two white-clothed angels. Then she meets the unrecognizable Jesus, who obviously, being mistaken for a gardener, was not clothed in radiant white like the angels, more likely dirty overalls, or the first century equivalent. He too, like the angels, questions why she is weeping, and she replies that she's grieving the loss of his body. He then calls her by name, Mary, at which point there is recognition. He tells her, though, not to touch him, which is a bit rough considering the Thomas episode coming. And he tells her to go and tell the other disciples. So what does this fable tell us about how to live? Firstly, the most powerful thing about the story is that the first witness to the resurrection, to the apparition of Jesus, was a woman, an unmarried woman who was alone. Women were not considered reliable legal witnesses. Unmarried women, particularly travelling with a group of itinerant men, were viewed suspiciously. A soul woman having the most important revelation in Christianity is more than likely not to be believed. Yet the Jesus groups, at least early on, seem not to be too bothered by all this. So the lesson is simply, don't discount the testimony of those deemed by the patriarchal arrangement of power unworthy, suspicious, or unreliable. And given the credential for leadership in the early movement, 1 Corinthians 15, was as a witness to the resurrection, don't discount those whom the patriarchal arrangement of power discount and still discount even today. For God overturns the tables of society's privileged ones and lifts up the excluded and discounted. Then, lastly, the garden story is a story about personal transformation. It tells us to not discount grief, not discount that the presence of the sacred meets us where we are, not in the holy temple set aside for sacred doings, but even in a garden of the dead. And the sacred speaks our name. It knows who we are, even if important others don't. The sacred speaks our name, and it is enough to trigger our hope. We are beloved. We are not alone. And even in our loss and confusion, can be tasked with a story to tell. The story that hope is not dead. The third and last fable is that of the Lakeside. And this is quite a big story with lots of threads and lots of fish, some of whom get barbecued. And the unrecognizable one, the Christ, appears as a fishing guide to fishermen. The revelation that it's him is not in the saying of a name, but in the size of the catch, which just proves that Peter, Andrew, and the others really were fishermen. Remarkably, when they come ashore and have modestly thrown on some more clothes, there is Jesus again, the Christ, by the charcoal fire, cooking fish and bread. Jesus the cook, Jesus the bread maker. Cherish that thought. And Jesus not only cooked, but he served it to them. Then there is a scene, note after they'd finished breakfast, things go better on a full belly, restoring Peter with a threefold question of, do you love me? And the imperatives to then feed Christ's lambs and sheep, which has always been understood as a taking of the threefold denial in the crucifixion narrative and making it into a commissioning, making a sow's heir into a silk purse. So then, how are we to live? What is the moral point of this fable? Again, like the other fables I've recounted, this one brings the sacred to where we are, at a place of work, when things are going badly, and at our food break. The sacred is not there to lord it over us, but to cook and serve, as we are not to lord it over others, but to cook and serve. We don't have to travel to Jerusalem, holy temple and all that, to find the sacred. For right here, right now in the heretical backwater of Galilee, back where the movement of Jesus all began, we can again experience that which is gone but is still present. And again, in our despair of the mistakes we have made, the people who, though important to us, we have betrayed by our actions and fear, the sacred can still meet us where we are, encouraging us in our loving, encouraging us in our tending our young and others dependent on us, encouraging the best in us, even when we can only see the worst, resurrecting us from the grave of despondency. In conclusion now, as we turn in the liturgical calendar to Pentecost next Sunday, let us leave these resurrection stories, remembering them not as tall tales of an irrelevant past, but as moral fables with points about how to live, how to find faith even today, in the coincidence and beauty of the sacred meeting us unimportant ones in our everyday, in our walking and eating, our weeping and working, in our cooking and serving, in our despair and triumphs, and hallowing our everyday as extraordinary, as a place of hope, a place of God. Blessings to you.